Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out my channel, and for all you moped subscribers, I'm working on a moped today. Here's the moped that I have, and this has been in here a few times, and unfortunately the guy has a problem keeping tire pressure where it needs to be. He lets it sit over the winter and the tire goes down and he just doesn't check it, and he has a hole in his tire in which I put a new tube last year. However, he let the pressure go down and pinched the tube, and now the tube leaks. So the guy asked me to find him some sort of a tire that was going to be a little bit heavier duty. Now, I'm going to show you a tire, and I'll put the link down below for it, and it's going to be for the Tomos Targa LX and Sprint models for quite a few years. It's the tire that is stock on the moped as far as size, but it's a different brand tire. Here's the tire I'm talking about. It's a 2.25 or 2 1/4 by 16. And this thing is much heavier than the one that came with it from the factory. And it's rated to 93 miles an hour. I don't see any of these mopeds getting close to that, but it's nice to know that there's a rating that high on this tire. That means that there's got to be a lot of quality that's built into it, so it can be certified for that kind of speed. So I'm going to show you how to put this on this moped and things to look for. I'm going to show you a couple of little tips, and also while I'm installing this tire, because of who the customer is, I'm going to be installing an inner tube. And again, the link's going to be down below for this inner tube. It's going to be a straight metal valve that has nuts on it just like you want. It's a good quality tube. It's something that's relatively cheap. If you have a back tire that's in very good shape, but it's going flat continuously because there's a hole in it, you can do a couple of things. You can put a patch on the inside of the tire to where the leak stops, or you can install a tube. If you do the patch, you have to take the tire completely off the rim. If you do a tube, however, all you have to do is take the tire off of the moped, break the bead on one side, slide the tube in, maybe with some powder on it to help it get into the position that it needs to be. Make sure it's not twisted, and then go ahead and carefully put the bead back on the correct side of the rim and inflate your tire and your tube, and it will seal the tire off and you'll be set. So that's an option. So if you have a good tire but it leaks, I'm going to again have the link down below for the tube that you need. Click the link, pick up the tube, and you can install it, which I'll be showing you how to do the entire, no pun intended, tire install. So let's go ahead and jump into that. All right, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and take off these nuts that hold on the tire to the frame or the swing arm. And the wrench is going to be a 17 millimeter. That's pretty common on all these mopeds as far as what holds on the forks. Just go ahead and break it loose. You're probably going to find yourself needing 2 wrenches a little bit later for tightening this, and I'll show you what that's all about. But I loosened that just a few turns. Now I'm going to go around to the other side and loosen that side. There's one more thing that we'll have to look at, and that's this brake. And there's a couple of ways to address the brake. I'll show you what I mean. Now the first thing I want to do after I've got them loose is go ahead and move these adjusters to where they're in the most loose position possible. Sorry about my arm being in the way there. And now allow the tire to go forward. Now, I have this moped in a vise on a lift table for the front tire, so it's not going to fall over. I also have a crane hooked up to the back to lift the back end up. Do you need any of these things? No, by no means. You can do this with a milk crate and just having a friend hold it for you. Make sure it doesn't fall over. At this point, with it as loose as it is, it still won't come out, and it's sort of a safety issue. The way these adjusters are designed is so the tire can't come off if it gets totally loose by accident, unless this is really loosened up. And you'll see what I mean here. Once I get it so loose, it's going to allow this adjuster to clear part of the frame and slip out of its spot. I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. I'm going to try to show you what I'm going to do with this brake here. As far as this brake goes, you can see that it's been on and off a few times going through this lock washer. And the problem that happens is if you keep on messing with this lock washer and this cable, the cable is going to snap. So what I'm going to do is try to not loosen this and remove the brake assembly. I'm going to try to get this thing off of the moped and in a position that I can manipulate it a little bit better. All I'm doing here is just loosening the cable from the tensioner. There we go. And then I'll allow the brake to actually move a little bit. And you can see the whole assembly's coming down at this point. There we go. I've got the wheel and tire basically off of the moped except the chains hanging onto it and this brake cable. This is the part that I wanted to talk about. You can, at that point, if you try to carefully do it, you can pull this brake assembly off once this nut is loose on this far side. All I did was remove the adjuster and the nut on that side, and it'll allow this entire axle assembly to come out now. Now at this point, it's just a matter of manipulating the entire axle out. Like that. And you can see it can be done to where you don't have to take your brake assembly off. At this time you want to check your brakes, make sure they're okay. It takes quite a while for these to wear out, but they do wear out. So now you can see this is pretty much loose except for the chain. So let me go ahead and pull the chain off on the other side. We'll reposition the camera. We'll go ahead and rotate that off. The wheel and tire is loose. It wasn't too difficult, was it? So now what I would do is loosen the nut that holds the tire stem and start working on removing the tire from the rim. The thing to be careful about if you're trying to salvage a tube that is inside the tire is not to puncture it with sharp tools. Now, both the tire on this is shot and the tube, so I don't have a problem using like a screwdriver or a pry bar to pull the tire off. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'll try to get the camera set up so you can see a good shot of it. All right, to go ahead and loosen this nut that's on here, it just so happens in this case it's a 12 millimeter. Remember, you're working on something that was made in Slovenia, at least these were, and that's going to be all metric. You can use a crescent wrench, that will work also. All right, once that's done, you push that little stem through to make sure that it doesn't interfere at some point. I'm going to pull the valve core out just so I know that all the air is released. They make these little tools in all different sizes and shapes, and you can get them that are on caps that are real inexpensive. I've had this one for a really long time. So there, the valve stem's out. I'll set that off to the side, and we'll start working on the tire. Now, a lot of people have a problem with tires and how to take them off. The whole trick is that whatever side you're taking off, whatever side you're prying with, in this case, like a screwdriver, you want to make sure that the other side is recessed inward towards the deepest part of the rim. That would be the middle part. Because if you don't, all you're doing is trying to pull the tire over the largest part of the rim, and it's not going to happen. It's going to be very, very difficult. So what I do is I try to depress the tire down to where it's in the deepest part, like I said, and then get with the other side and start prying it over the lip. If you just realize that simple thing, that all you're doing is trying to pry it over the rim's lip by giving it enough distance that it's has enough rubber to stretch over the lip. And you'll see once you get past a certain part, the tire will be really easy to come off. But it's that first initial over the edge part it's always the most difficult part. And just work in baby steps, just like that. Now I have a couple of screwdrivers. Sometimes you may need 3 screwdrivers, but after a while you get used to doing this and it's not such a big deal. Plus they make special tools like what they call tire spoons, stuff like that. They make these in plastic so they don't get, you know, a problem with scratching the rim or anything like that. But for the most part, you can see once you get past a certain point, it's not too difficult to do. It just goes ahead and starts coming off. So we'll go ahead and work the rest of the way off. There we go. Some people like to put soapy water on the tire and rim to get it to where the tire actually comes off a little bit easier or goes on easier. I'm not a real big fan of that. It just causes a mess. If you do this after a while, you can do it without the soapy water. Now, at this point, this is what it's going to look like if you want to do just an inner tube change. What you will do if you're changing just the inner tube at this point, or putting an inner tube in, is you will start sliding the inner tube in the tire all the way around like I'm showing here, making sure it doesn't get twisted. And then what I would do is I would try to inflate the inner tube, then deflate the inner tube, and do that a few times to make sure there's no twist to it. Then I would position the tire back on the rim without pinching the inner tube. And again, I would inflate and deflate it a few times to make sure everything's seated correctly without any kind of a bind or a pinch. In this case, we're going to do the entire tube and tire. So let me go ahead and continue to remove the tire and tube like we just discussed. At this point, I definitely want to get that metal stem, I should say. And again, you can see that the idea is to get this tire in the deepest part of the wheel to allow it to come off easier, which that's what I've got right now. And we'll go ahead and lift it up and over. Again, I'm not too concerned about this inner tube because it's destroyed, but you can see it's not a big deal. Once you get it that far, pretty much do it by hand, just like that. So now the wheel and tire are free from each other. And this guy's old inner tube, I have a project that I need that inner tube for, so I'm going to keep that for something else. But here's the tire, and even though that shows some tread, this is really weak in the middle. I mean, it's very pliable and thin. So I know that this tire is shot. Now for the new tire. At this point, you may want to take and clean up your tire and rim. If you've got any kind of corrosion that's in here. I'm going to take a wire brush. I'm going to clean this up real quick. All right, so I got that cleaned up, and now it's time to get the tire started on there. So again, same with the positioning. You just want to get this thing started any way that you possibly can. Again, some people like to use soapy water to aid them in getting it started. All I'm going to do here is get it lined up pretty close to where I want it, and then start with a screwdriver to get that first lip going. You just want to get the edge of the tire just like that, and then work it around up on the rim. Have patience when you're doing this. It's not really hard. You just got to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're doing and not work against yourself. You can see most of this was being done by my hand. Now I just have a couple places that I need to go with it. So I'm going to go with the screwdriver on this side, lift it up on the highest point, the part that's probably the most difficult, and pop it up on there. Just like that. So now the tire's on there partially, but now we've got to get the tube in place. Now the tube's always a little tricky. So take off your valve cap, take off your outer nut. You're going to line that up first. And the way you're going to do that is just get it close to where, here's the hole here on the rim. You're just going to get that close, and it's going to push the tube inside the tire. This could take a little while, so I'll fast forward all this. Now I have that stem lined up, but the tube still isn't all the way in. But now that I've got it lined up with the hole, I definitely want to tighten it a little bit to secure it in position so it doesn't move around. So I'm putting the nut that's going to stay on it, obviously, on the outside to hold that stem. And I don't need it real tight at this point. I'll just get it to where it's past maybe the halfway point so I can get a tire inflator on there to help you go up and down with the pressure. I can tell you right now that this tube, again, that the link will be down below. is a really good quality tube, because I'm finding that it's lining up a lot better than some of these cheap Chinese tubes that I've had in the past. It wants to stay centered and not twist, which is a very good thing. Yeah, that tube is a really good tube. It is lined up without twisting at all, which I am impressed. Okay, so now the part that you got to be careful about, and that is installing the tire on the rim, the final bead. The way that you do that is position the lip or the bead of the tire, again, the same thing that I've been saying all along, in the deepest part of the rim, which is the center, but you have to get it started first. You can see I'm just doing that by hand. This is the point in which people may want to use soapy water to help aid in getting it to slide over the rim. Now, I'm going to be going to my screwdrivers here shortly. It's just the longer that I can go without using those sharp metal objects, the better. Because there's always a chance of pinching that inner tube whenever you get those screwdrivers in play. All right, so it's time. It's time, unfortunately, to use the screwdrivers without pinching the inner tube. Make sure that you're on the rim. Make sure that the tire is in the deepest part of the rim, like that. When you're prying with the screwdriver, you want to be prying on the rim without the inner tube being pinched. Make sure the screwdriver does not slip down into. And I'm going to try to start over here. I'm going to hold the tire on this side and try to start it over here, again, without pinching that inner tube. You can see how easy it would be to pinch that inner tube. And if you do, don't feel bad. Everybody does it. At one point or another, it happens. I have a little bit duller screwdriver here. It's awful close. Again, being awful careful with this because I don't want to pinch the tube. I'm going to say it 1,000 times because it's a consideration that you have to take every single time you put that screwdriver near it. It's really close. Go ahead and push the tire down. You can see it really wants to go on the rest of the way at this point. It's really close here. This is where you want to double check again that the tire is in the deep part of the rim, and it is. So it's just a little bit here. I might be able to do it just with my hands. Nope, it's a little bit still too tight, so let's finish it off with the screwdriver. And it's on. How about that? Not bad at all. So now all you have to do at this point is inflate the inner tube a few times, and again, make sure that it's not twisted. I'm going to take my tire inflator, I'm going to put it on there, inflate the tire, let the air out, inflate the tire, let the air out, and hopefully everything is straight. I can tell that the bead's not seated correctly here. So what I want to do is let all the air out. All right, a couple things happened there, and I wanted to be perfectly honest about it. And one of the things was I neglected to tell you an important step. And that is, on these tires, you have to check the direction of rotation. There's an arrow that points the way that the tire is to spin once it's mounted. And guess what? Yep, you got it. I had a 50-50 chance of getting it right, and I didn't. So I went ahead and I pulled the tire back off and put it back on. Also, I noticed that whenever I was putting it on and I had that nut on the inside on the valve stem, inside the rim, it did not want to seat very well. It was holding the tube in a weird manner that it allowed the tire not to seat quite the way that it should. So again, in all honesty, I wanted to make sure that you knew that you may or may not use that nut. In this case, I ended up taking that nut off. And third, again, with the soapy water aiding in the mounting, once it's already mounted, on the rim to make sure that it seats correctly. At that point, I put a little bit of soapy water on there to help it seat. And what I'm talking about is, if you look at the tire carefully, which I don't know if you can see here, let me see if I can get it with another camera. If you look at the tire really carefully, there are some indexing lines. There's about 2 ribs that are showing, and those 2 ribs that are inside by the bead should be equally showing all the way around the rim, all the way equal, so you know that nothing is twisted as far as the tube goes, and that the tire, the bead, has seated correctly in the rim. The way you do that is apply a little bit of soapy water. Again, I don't like doing it whenever I'm assembling the tire to the rim, but once the tire is on the rim, it'll aid in setting the bead on the tire. And what you want to do is overinflate the tire to about 50 pounds, maybe 55 at the most. And what that does is pushes the tire up in the position that it needs to be at. Now, am I going to leave it at that position? No. What I'm going to do, though, is leave it at 50 pounds just for about 10 minutes to make sure that it's seated correctly all the way around. And again, making sure that those 2 little reference lines are equal all the way around. If they are, then I know that I'm okay. Once that's the case, I will then put the tire pressure back down the way it needs to be. It's 33 pounds on this one. Also, now that I have that soapy water on there, I can check for leaks. Knowing that I have a tube, I know that I won't have much for leaks going on. But if you don't have a tube, you may want to check to make sure your rim hasn't deteriorated to the point where it's leaking past the seal on the bead to the rim. All right, so I went ahead and inflated the tire at 53 pounds, I believe it was, and waited for about 10 to 15 minutes, came back, checked. There is no fast leak, so I, at that point, checked to make sure that the seating still looked really good on the bead, and it did. So we're good here. What I need to do now is go ahead and reinstall the tire and wheel, and I'll show you a couple of things you need to look for whenever you're doing that to make sure you get it on there correctly. So let's go ahead and jump into that. All right, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you put it on the right way, obviously, chain side towards the chain. That washer that I talked about earlier, this is what I was telling you about. It has a raised area so it can fit against the bearing correctly, yet this flange that is built into the spacer helps keep the oil from being contaminated, that keeps the bearings greased. So this is the way that it goes on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position it back the way we had it. I'm going to slide that brake back into the hub and push the axle through. Again, this is so I didn't have to disconnect that cable, which is really frayed. So now it's just manipulating the axle back into place. I don't expect this to go necessarily really smooth. Now, there's a spacer that's inside that you have to be aware of to get the axle to go through. Once the axle's through, go ahead and just rotate it around until everything lines up, just like that. Now, I can start to position the wheel back up the way that it was. So the first thing I want to do is get the chain close to where it needs to be. Put it around the axle in this case. It was a little bit easier than I thought right there. And then on this side, there's a locking assembly that keeps it connected to the swing arm correctly. I'll show you that here. Okay, I want to show you here this area right here. This is notched for a slot that is up on the control arm, which is going to be difficult to see. Let me see if I can shoot you through this way and you can see it. You can see this post right here that this cable's laying on top of. You got to make sure that you put that slot right here on the hub over that post. So let's go ahead and position everything back into place. You have to be patient whenever you're working it back on. It'll go. You just have to make sure that everything gets lined up. All right, at this point I'm returning that brake cable back over into its held position like it was before. All right, now that I have that side, what I'll do is go ahead and position this washer back in here underneath. Again, we're going to have to try to do this all at the same time. It's sometimes gets a little bit difficult to manipulate these 5, 6 things at a time. Now that I got that washer back in place, I can get the axle back up where it needs to be. In this case, what I'm going to do is let the jack down, the crane down, to help assist hold the tire where I need it to be. The tighter all this is, the better. That way you know that your moped's not wore out. I've had some of these that these frames have been real sloppy. Okay, so now I've got everything really close to where it needs to be. We'll go ahead and put on the adjusters, which the adjusters on the other side already, because I never did take that nut completely loose. Go ahead and put the washer on, and then the nut. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Whenever you're doing these adjusters, you don't want to over tighten the chain. You want to make it to where there's about a 1/2 inch deflection. You don't want the chain to be too loose or you're going to strip some gears. You also want to make sure that the tire stays straight with the moped. And the way that you can do that is to make sure that the distance between the tire and the swing arm is equal on both sides. And I'm talking about the front of the tire. Where I'm putting my hand right now, actually I have gloves on so you can't see so much. Where I'm putting my hand right now, my fingers, I can tell there's a large gap on this side, but I don't think the gap's as big on the other side. So that means the tire needs to come this way. To make it come this way, you would adjust this adjuster back that way, and it makes it more tight. It also makes the chain more tight. Whenever you go to tighten down these nuts, whenever you finally have everything positioned the way that you want it to be, you got to be careful, because as you tighten this nut, it's going to make this adjuster want to loosen up. Same on the other side. It's going to do the opposite though. It's going to move the adjuster and make it want to tighten up, and that's going to put your alignment out. Because a lot of people adjust the chain, they never pay attention to how straight the wheel and tire are in the swing arm, and even though the chain might be adjusted correctly, the tire might be pointed in the wrong direction, and you'll get some really weird riding characteristics. And if you're into a high speed situation, that might be an issue, or even rain for that matter. Now don't pay much attention to the fender and where it's positioned on the wheel and tire, because you can move that. This whole fender assembly, it bends, it moves really easy, so that's not really a good gauge. You want to use the swing arm as the gauge, and it's the gap between the front of the tire here on the side and the swing arm. Just feel that. So let me go ahead and adjust this out, and I'll come back and show you what it should look like. Okay, so I'm all finished here. Let me show you a couple things that I looked at. I got this moped turned around, I took the crane away, and I've got it up on its kickstand so I could get to both nuts at the same time. Basically what I did is I held this nut, and as I held this nut, I tightened this one. Because if you remember correctly, what I said was the adjuster likes to be tightened on this side. Once that was tightened, I went ahead and checked for the chain tension, and a lot of these mopeds, whenever the chain goes around, it has a tendency to be tighter and looser as it spins, and that's kind of a manufacturing flaw. However, over time, these sprockets will wear naturally and cause that to go away, to where the high-low situation will fix itself. The other thing I check for is whenever I'm spinning the tire, I look for overall roundness to make sure that there's no like big bump that all of a sudden shows up, like if it didn't seat well, or if the tube was folded up inside when I inflated it. Because the tubes aren't exact size all the time. They cover a couple of different ranges of tires. Sometimes there might be a little fold that's going on in there, and when you go to inflate it, that fold causes a big bulge on one side that pushes the tire out of the rim. You'll get a thumping sensation whenever you're riding, and a bouncing sensation when you get to speed. Now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and lower the tire pressure back down to 33 pounds, which it should be at. Make sure that these nuts are tight, but not over tightened. You don't want to pull the valve stem out of the tube or anything. And then at that point, I'll go ahead and fire it up, make sure that it still runs for him okay, because if not, he'll bring it back saying that it doesn't run. I want to make sure that's not the case. So that's it. That's how you put the tire on. And I know that it's a long, drawn-out process, and there are some things to look for, and I wanted to make sure that you saw those things. After you've done this a few times, it's like second nature, just like riding a bike, or a moped in this case. Thanks for watching my videos. If you like this video, click like or subscribe, and I'll try to get more on like it. If you want to buy this tire specifically for a Tomos moped, the link is down below for the tire and the tube that I used in this video. And you can be rest assured that this tire is far better than the one that came with it. And although the ones that came with it are very good, these tires seem to be pretty decent. I really like it. They're made in Korea, they're not Chinese, and they have good quality built into them. I could tell whenever I was putting everything together, it seemed like it was a really good tire. So I think this guy's going to be really happy. Thanks for watching. Bye.